Hi, everyone. My name is Benji Hanson Bundy. I'm the deputy editor at A.Team, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our panel on demystifying AI in healthcare. More than 70% of companies are already experimenting with Gen AI. But what about the traditionally risk averse healthcare industry? What are the most promising use cases? What are the barriers to adoption? How can health tech startups find success partnering with large hospital systems? And what are everyone's best predictions about where this is all headed? So, we're really excited to have you here today. Over 300 people signed up, which is awesome and speaks to the major interest on this topic, as well as the level of expertise on the panel. Um, but before we get started, a little bit about A.Team. If you haven't heard of it already, A.Team is a platform that uses AI to bring together Ocean's 11 style teams of Silicon Valley product builders to build transformative technology. We work with everyone from startups to Fortune 500, including several major healthcare leaders like LifePoint and HCA. Healthcare is one of our specialties. Within our builder network, we have the Healthcare Guild, which is made up of builders who specialize in this industry. There's some tabs at the top of the webinar screen that you can use to explore us. One piece of housekeeping, our panelists are going to pause to take questions throughout the panel. So get your questions into the Q&A tab and we'll bring them up on the screen. And if you have any issues with your feed, just try refreshing the browser window. Finally, let me introduce our panelists. First up, Ed Kopetsky, the former Chief Innovation Officer at Stanford Children's Health, the top-ranked children's hospital in Northern California. He's also a founding member of CHIME, which is the College of Healthcare Information Management Executives. Very cool to have Ed here. Next, we have Ohad Zadok, the Chief Technology Officer and founder of Alike.Health, which creates community among patients and is already using AI. Very cool. And finally, Mida Pezeshkian, Ph.D., an A.Team builder and the founder of Stemma CG, an advisory firm focused on data-driven strategy and AI in healthcare and life sciences. Let's start with you, Mida. What are the use cases for AI in healthcare that you're most excited about? What areas do you think show the most promise?
Well, I think there's actually a lot to be excited about, but what I would say perhaps I'm most excited about would be the application of AI, generative AI in drug discovery. So earlier this year, for example, we saw the first design and validation of de novo therapeutic antibodies using zero-shot learning. And what this really means for our future is actually we're going to be able to see a lot faster drug time to market. And this hopefully pushes the drug discovery pharma therapeutics companies to tackle some of the more difficult drugs, orphan drugs, and rare disease drug focused therapeutics into market. So that's perhaps one of the most exciting things that has happened in the past year or two.
Ed, do you want to chime in? Oh, Ed, it looks like you're muted right now.
Apologize for that. Sorry about that. I agree with Mida. I think that there's a lot in the future. I think more immediately, the opportunity to take administrative burden out of the system is really the priority. Doctors deal with so much textual writing, summary notes, etc. And I think generative AI can certainly assist that, create templates, create letters for post-visit summaries. I think the workforce in the healthcare system is way overburdened, and we got to get back to core caring for patients and not regulatory compliance, insurance, all these other things that are loaded on our clinicians and dilute them from direct patient care. I think the other big thing is imaging and other pattern recognition capabilities in historical data sets. The healthcare system has digitized data for now 10 or 15 years. We have huge historical data sets, and at Stanford, for example, we're mining that data and looking for patterns in images like we're seeing today that we may have diagnosed differently in the past or whatever, and we can now see the outcomes on those patients. So I think a lot of new knowledge development through history of data is going to be a real play here as well, and bringing it to the center of direct patient care.
Love that answer. Ohad, do you want to jump in? I think you're muted as well. Sorry. Maybe down at the bottom of the screen.
Yes. I'll try to refresh it in a second.
I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. So I think when talking about AI and healthcare, we all go to algorithms for drug predictions or conditions, getting diagnosis, stuff like that. I think I couldn't agree more with Ed, saying that we have to work with doctors to make this change possible. So starting with reducing the time they spend in front of a computer and letting them spend more time in front of a patient is probably goal number one that we can do. And to achieve that, basically summarizing medical history, maybe triaging people in the ER room, or highlighting people that should be tested, or maybe even do preventive medicine to those people. Those are use cases of AI that I think that are feasible. It's only starting to see them right now in the health system, and I think that the system can work with and incorporate easier.
And we think of doctors as these highly trained professionals, basically at the executive level, but they spend all this time doing basically entry level data entry. So, how do you think generative AI can help us rethink the role of the clinician as we know it today?
I can probably jump in on that. I would say perhaps flipping the order of how we tend to think about, medical professionals, using AI, as an assistant, for them. So at the moment, we think of, okay, healthcare professionals need to write their own medical notes because they're the biggest expert, and that's definitely true. But I think applying generative AI to capture that expertise and summarize it, and even perhaps add some predictions to it, things that the provider can take a look and decide if it's relevant for their use. And of course, over time, we will get even better. So I would say flipping the order of making AI the provider's assistant, not the other way around, if you will.
I totally agree. Great answer. I actually talked to our CMIO in preparation for this, and how will adoption come off? She says, I'm already adopted it. I'm doing my after visit summaries, and I mean, what used to take me 10 or 15 minutes a patient, I can, and there's empathy and the stuff. It's really incredible. So I think clinicians are already starting to adopt it. And again, I think as an assistant, get me the data on this patient, what happened 2 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. All that can be, it's streamlined instead of looking up historical records. Maybe some are still on paper, I don't know, but I really think there's a lot there. I think appointment scheduling is another thing. Just think about patients not able to get a visit for 2 months, and yet real time, 30% of patients cancel their appointments. So how can we optimize the flow and improve the valued time of clinicians not waiting around for patients, or making sure they got a good schedule and are filling in. So I think there's a ton of applications here that Mida has characterized as assistance for the clinicians. I think is a really great example.
Oh, Ohad, what's it going to take to implement some of this stuff on the technical level? As someone who's working with this already, all these use cases, I assume they're not just plug and play. So what kind of investment does it take?
So the only plug and play that we can use today is the it's called LLM, large language models, which basically encapsulates knowledge and also the ability to use a free text form as an API. Basically, you can write to it, it writes back. So the core technology is there. The only question is, how can we integrate it into the system? So it's more of an integration question and not of it's not a science problem, more than an engineering problem, which is not too hard at this point. So, for example, I can give you a use case that I think interest a lot of healthcare practitioners and also maybe the payer side, the claim approval process, which can take, I don't know how is it in the US, but in Israel it can take a few days. I guess that in the US it's probably longer. A lot of those flows can be automated, like 97% of claims are already approved. Maybe if we can auto-approve 80%, so patient can get an answer right away, and then we can reduce burden to the payer as well, and the overall experience will be better for both sides, also the cost. So not
I'm
too
just
hard at
gonna,
this point.
yeah, I like that answer. I'm gonna pause this here and do a quick poll of the audience. If we can pull that up on the screen to get a sense from everyone, um, what they think, uh, how healthcare experiences can be improved with AI. Just take a second here and look at these options and pick the one that you think is the most feasible or the best opportunity. I'm going to vote myself. We'll just wait for a couple more votes to trickle in. Oh, interesting. Better prediction and prevention of diseases. Ed, do you want to talk about that one?
Well, I think that first of all, I think one of the great advantages is research and education, both of them. And when someone can research certain conditions on a patient and hone in on what are the most likely diagnoses, that takes huge variance out of the system. Okay? I think that's a key. The other thing I'll mention on education, and I personally went out and tried it, I can find out about my stuff and other correlated issues on just a search now. And trying to get a clinician's attention in that limited 8 minutes in the visit, there just isn't enough time for people to mind share. So I think for patients, and this is, it doesn't take much to ask a question or ask a task, and I have found it. I'm amazed at how it can integrate. Now you got to watch out for errors and hallucinations, of course, and that's where you can't just turn it over and say, "Hey, the system's going to give you a diagnosis." You got to have experts involved, and patients rarely have one condition, and that's the risk, I think, in moving too fast in some of this, is that um, the whole patient isn't going to be well understood except by the clinicians. I think that's going to be a big limit. But I mean, the upside is that I'm streamlining my diagnosis, or the physician are helping, and then they can hone in on the real data as opposed to be involved in all the noise.
Okay, so but what would you say to the skeptics who say that generative AI isn't ready yet to be deployed in an industry where you can't just move fast and break things, right? Because you're responsible for people's lives, and you know, there's really there's HIPAA compliance. There's all this sensitivity around the data. Mida, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I would say, we need to start with testing and validation. I would say there's a lot of great advancements already that I think are ready to be able to use. I mean, there are, health systems or smaller groups that are doing this already, and in biotech and pharma, a lot of it has been happening as well. But I think testing, validation, really looking at what are you seeing and what is the application that you're trying to tackle, and certain decision making processes, like for example prediction and diagnostics, they would be needing perhaps a little bit more stringent testing, because of course it's in front of a patient, you need to be very sure. But I think upstream of that, there's a lot of really interesting things that we could already do, and sort of inching forward and consistently moving forward would be probably the best way to do it.
Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit. So first of all, we are already using AI solutions in healthcare. It's something that's already happening for the past 10 years. Generative AI basically just make it faster. The development cycle is faster. And when developing an AI model, I guess in a way, it's similar to a clinical trial. So you do all the science at the lab, but then when you want to prove that it's working, then you do the phase 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 clinical trial. It's basically giving it to people. In AI, we call it creating a validation sample and a test sample. And you make sure that your solution works. So this stage does not change. You still need the safety measures. You still need to do everything that you did before, even for automated tasks, not necessarily AI. The only difference is that it's much faster. You can achieve things in basically in 5 to 10 times faster than we used to have. A lot of data scientists are going to look for a job right now. Sorry to say that, because the technology is much better, and it's even safer because you don't need to reinvent the wheel here. The majority is already written.
I have a question from the audience here. I'm going to send it to you, Ed, and it's related. How will the privacy and security components of AI be addressed to protect, health records, basically?
That I don't have an answer. I think we're at the frontier right now. I mean, we've spent the last 20 years protecting health information, and so I mean, there's regulations around it. You got to be HIPAA compliant, et cetera, et cetera. You cannot take data offshore in the United States. So any server who's processing this stuff offshore is illegal. We have a rule against moving PHI overseas, and so there's a lot of complexities here. The general answer is if you're inside the protected network, you're safe. The minute we move patient data outside of our network, there's all kinds of stuff that comes into play, and legal requirements on the part of people we're sending it to. So I think that's a big space that, and by the way, then the question is who owns the data? And today in this country, the institution owns it, and that's who's liable for its breach. Tomorrow, does the patient own it and get to choose where it's going? We haven't seen an ability for citizens to control data in social media. So I think I think that's probably one of the biggest questions is how are we going to protect patient data? Have they given consent for their data to be used in these ways? When you go into a hospital, you have to sign a consent. And I don't know how many people read it, but at our place in an academic center, we always get consent for using the data for research. That's our mission. And that's why you come to our place. But most community hospitals don't have that. So I think I think there needs to be a lot of work around who's going to secure the data. How will it work? I don't know. And again, if it's used in a de-identified way, it's safe, but then how do you get them, treating me in a personalized way? So I don't know. Those are some of the complexities. I think that's a $1 million question actually right now.
One of the
more.
big use cases we hear about is like taking all of this unstructured data, right, and asking it intelligent questions, learning from it. That's the promise of generative AI, right? You can pull from like 10 different health record systems and get it all in one place. Um, is that the solution to the data problem, and what are the hiccups there?
Well, I'll just add some comment there. I don't want to turn it over to my colleagues, but consider that 80% of the medical record today is unstructured data. There's no human that can synthesize it all. And I'll give you a prime example on my own. When I moved here to California, I gave a family history. And my father passed away from kidney disease at 42. I have been treated for 14 years. None of that has been factored into my tests, my anything. So we have a huge store of data that can be used way more optimally, almost magically in 30 seconds. And I've tried it out personally looking for stuff I'm interested in. It's amazing. So I think that's the key play there. The structured data, we can already graph trend. We know the variances like lab data. But all the text that patients tell us about family issues or whatever, none of that seems to be getting factored in. And yet it consumes 80% of the record. So today it's noise, but tomorrow it's critical information and decision making. I think that's the hope. So I'll stop there and let others add to that or dispute it.
Maybe adding more to the previous question that you asked, and then so basically, first of all, you can't lose what you don't have. So, as an example, at Alike, we don't collect PII that we don't need to. We just collect the minimum necessity for a system to function well. So that's the first rule. Second rule, you can do PII removal. You can also have algorithmics for that. You have open source software that can also assist you in that. And then you can send it to the model with all the PII removed. The third solution, if you want to be on the safe side, you can run your own model on your own network. That's not a problem. You can't lose something that you don't send outside. So you don't have to use GPT by OpenAI. You can take the open source by Hugging Face or even Facebook latest model that they just released, run it on your own software, on your own servers, and it's in your network just as you write code. I think the most interesting about what Ed just said is, well, basically AI cannot replace doctors, right? We already, at least for now, we understand that. What it can do is allow the doctor maybe to have a more holistic view on the patient and giving him more controls or information that it can then use for decision making. So AI, as a rule of thumb, can usually do what an expert can do in under a second given the information. But it can do it a lot faster, and it can process the huge amount of information in just a few seconds and give you the output. So basically, if you take a patient, give a doctor about 2 hours to go through all his medical records and all of the history, and then he'll probably get the right decision, right? So we can speed up this process to 8-minute visit. That's basically the promise here.
Yeah, I totally agree with both Ohad and Ed on the topics that you raised. For the question that you asked about the unstructured data across these different health systems, one thing that I would raise would be the problem of integration or lack of integration across healthcare. So NLP and large language models are very capable and have been quite capable for some time for managing a lot of, reading the unstructured data and putting these concepts and information together. But I think the issue is, where do we get the data and how do we connect the dots? And I think that's what Ed was raising about, moving medical records from place to place is extremely difficult at the moment. Of course, there are companies that are using blockchain. This is some of the new work that's coming out that's quite interesting. I'm curious to see where it goes. But I would say we really need to think about, how do we stitch together the super fragmented and complex healthcare system. And certainly the technology is there to take it from there on.
So there's another interesting use case in the chat here. Um, it says the question is, what are you seeing in terms of using AI around social determinants of health issues, right? Like the social factors. Um, who wants to take this one? This is a really interesting question, Ed. I think you've got him.
Well, actually, just in the last couple of years only, that's been a new emphasis, and we've now built that into interviews of patients. The issue is it's not structured again, so there's the opportunity. And let's say I tell my primary care physician that I'm having sleep problems, right? And the next thing I do is I call for another visit from another specialist. Are they seeing that? Right? AI can bring it to their attention. Whereas the historical thing is this new clinician has to ask for the record. Maybe they have access to it because they have a need to know, right? Uh, that's a legal issue, by the way. You're not allowed to look at patients' data unless you have a need to know, which, that's another regulatory issue. But you do need to know. And I think this is an issue about patient consent to the sharing of data. And Mida mentioned in particular when you go across different health systems. Okay. I've had some surgeries at Stanford, but my primary care doc is with Sutter. And is that data shared? It's very difficult, right? And that's where I think the patient and AI can help a lot pull stuff, critical information together. Going back to social determinants of health, we now are looking for that and targeting families for intervention that may have food, shortages. They're not fully in. We have to help these patients differently than we do others, right? It's not, you're not going to prescribe a controlled diet when they have food insufficiency, right? You gotta provide social services and stuff like that. So that's become a big factor, and I think the emphasis on equity and access, clearly, people who are insured and wealthy have access. People in rural areas and without insurance don't, and we gotta bridge that gap. That's not equitable. So those are
Ohad,
things we're looking at.
I feel like your platform in a way deals with this, right? Because you're connecting patients with each other to discuss their experience, right?
Yeah, so what we do is we connect patients together based on both medical conditions and also using social determinants and other factors that are more soft. So people can tell us about themselves, can tag interest, and what they relate to, maybe some demographic details, and we use all of that to make sure that patients are assigned together. Yeah, so you're being assigned to another patient which can contribute to you, that knows what you're going through, can have a healthy chat with you, and can actually help your health conditions. So I think it's an aspect of medicine that we used to neglect a lot.
I love that. I have seen consistent research showing that connecting patients together with similar conditions improves outcomes. It's amazing because
Yes.
there's mind share and supplemented with it with tools like that. I totally agree is a huge upside. Sorry,
Before
Mida.
we, oh, go ahead, Mita, if you want to chime in.
No, those were really good points. I agree.
Before we move on to the barriers to adoption, which is when things get heated, I just want to talk about one other use case, which was in the poll, but which is the mental health sort of side of things. Right? There's clearly a huge opportunity here, but what are the specifics, and what are you most excited about?
maybe I'll start that. I think what I'm perhaps most excited about is kind of related to what we just talked about, which is connecting, people with people. And I think, mental health is a very fluid and also difficult area for a lot of people. So I think having the ability to perhaps have an AI support, to talk through things, to sort of track things and help with sort of that fluid nature of mental health, I think it's extremely helpful. And also just having the ability to be there at the right time. We know with mental health, a lot of times the decision to unfortunately end one's life is a very quick one. It roots into a very long-term sort of set of problems, but that decision is very quick. And I think if we can use AI to be there when that person needs that support, I think it would make a difference.
Let me add a couple things. I absolutely agree with Mida. Recently, I met a company that basically is working in the behavioral space and can parse down 350 questions of diagnosis questions to 10 or 12 in 10 minutes. And it's basically using probability and Q&A, and it hones down to your most likely diagnosis. That has huge potential. Thinking about mental health problems cropping up in high school, it's a big issue. Stuff becomes apparent. We're not testing kids. We're waiting for the failure today and the evolution of the disease, whereas we could be getting early predictions right there. Another thing that I just met is another company that is doing sensing for medication in your bloodstream, sensing technology. And as an example, in the treatment of addiction, methadone has been used for years, but the patient is required to come into the clinic every day. That means access problems, and it also means drug dealers out in the parking lot waiting for relapse and cheaper drugs. This would, number one, personalize your metabolism of the drug and get you the right dose. Number two, it would alleviate the need to bring patients into clinics for their doses, because if you can monitor their adherence and monitor their use, we're golden. And frankly, for all chronic diseases, medication management and compliance is the number one problem. And if we can actually have continuous monitoring, we can alert the clinician or the social worker or the family that, hey, patient's starting to drop off. So I think that's a combination thing that is going to come to reality.
On Alike, majority of our patients suffer from mental issues. So I think the top three conditions are probably anxiety, depression, and PTSD. What we incorporated just a few months ago is basically an AI that goes through all the questions and answers that are previously in the system. We have more than 80,000 of them by now. And when you ask a new question on Alike, you instantly get an answer from, we call it Alike Wisdom, which is based on others people's answers. You can also get reference to those answers. So you get an immediate answer, and also references to questions that are very related to what you asked. The community will jump in, but as Mida said, you get an immediate answer for most of the things that you ask. So I think that's another aspect.
So this does sort of lead to the barriers to adoption, right? Because medicine is not an easy industry to implement change in, right? There's all these different stakeholders and factors. Mida, maybe I'll start with you. What are the practical and philosophical obstacles in healthcare standing in the way of Gen AI adoption?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say on the philosophical side of things, I think it's the fear of unknown, because AI at the moment, even though it's been around for a long time, but I think it's now in the public sphere and has raised a lot of sort of doomsday scenarios that has concerned people. So I think education about what AI is and continuous sort of working out what AI is and what it means to people in medicine and healthcare is really important. Practically speaking, I would say a lot of healthcare systems don't really have the system and also the change management capabilities to be able to bring these technologies in-house, and working out how we could enable more of that to happen, I think would be very helpful. And that really, another thing to add to that would be connecting executives and technical people in a way where they can learn from each other and they can find a way to speak the same language. Because I think, we put a lot of the decision making on executives, but they may not always know the technical depth of what needs to happen. And also, data scientists traditionally have been more, put on development projects or things that were highly technical. So that connection is not very native to all of us yet. And I think there are people that can speak both languages or facilitate the conversation to prompt a little bit more engagement. And the more we all talk to each other and understand each other, I think the fear goes down, and then our ability to be able to execute goes up.
Ed, I saw you nodding there. What
having implemented EMRs and all this, but totally agree with Mida. I would summarize it at there needs to be a programmatic approach, not 100 one-offs. Because then there's parameters for decision making, there's involvement of the right people, there's support for the funding and support for the change. When you don't do that, you end up fighting each other across the system. And, on top of that, the finance side is looking for a hard ROI, even though we're on the innovation front of this yet. Secondly, the regulatory people want to make sure we don't threaten the brand with a mistake. And so there's all kinds of stuff. I can only answer it to say, not every healthcare system is going to take this on. There's leaders and followers. And the leaders have research capabilities. They have motivation for discovery. The rest of it are trying to hold on to a 1 or 2% margin and are afraid of this. So we need the leaders to step up and thoroughly do this right and qualify it. And that's going to be places like academic medical centers or specialty centers like MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, and stuff. The rest of healthcare will follow and adopt the standards, but they've got to be proven. And it's a very conservative business, as we said earlier. I think I'll just stop there. I probably could talk all day on how to fail or how to succeed, but
actually, Ed, can I push you on that for 1 second? Because I know that Stanford Children's has been recognized for digital innovation, right? This is like your forte. What does it take to do digital transformation in a conservative industry?
I mean, my first hard answer is strong partnerships and service culture. If you think IT is going to do this, that's a death knell. The issue is the owners need to be brought together with capability folks like IT and develop it together. When I came here, I let the clinicians lead. I hired a CMIO. We built the clinical informatics program. We built governance and planning with everybody involved, clinicians and administrators. And for the first time, when they were talking priorities, together they were balancing financial investments versus clinical. And it really works if there's the right partnership structure and governance set up. I would just say the other thing, it's about leadership culture. And I'll just I wrote down enabling or controlling and growth or cost cutting. And I think that describes healthcare and differentiates people. For a place like Stanford Children's, where we went from 600 million to 2.5 billion in 10 years, that's a growth culture. And we had the right people. We knew we had to gain market share. We knew we had to grow, and we did. And we had a board supportive of that. You take another hospital that's in financial straits, or there's been leadership turnover and board's worried, you're not going to advance stuff like this. And so you kind of got to look at the leadership situation and culture and their partnership with the clinicians. In an academic medical center, it's got to be together. You've got to be with faculty, residents, interns, training. So I'll stop there. I think just differentiating that culture thing is a key thing.
Does anyone want to add to that?
Maybe I'll just add that it's always easier to automate flows that are already existing. Like doctor's visit, you already have a flow for that. If I can do it in 10 times the cost and a better experience for the patient, it's much easier for the organization to adapt.
Ohad, you're sort of in the health tech space. What do you think it's going to take for health tech startups to have success partnering with large hospital systems?
So that's a great question. Probably the reason that a lot of health startups are failing. I think the first answer is to understand the mindset and current flows of the current health systems. Like the decision maker, at least in the US, is not the chief medical officer, is sometimes the CFO of the organization. And you have to understand it, and you have to be in this mindset when you try to sell and you try to innovate. So a lot of doctors will tell you, we don't need another indicator, we don't need another predictive algorithm for any kind of condition. We need to have our own workflows work better, and you need to incorporate to our flows. Don't try to invent new flows for us. So I think that's probably the best tips for a startup.
If I may add to that, I agree with Ohad on that point. And one of the things that I've noticed coming from sort of the biotech space into healthcare, being on the side of a company that provided service and materials to these different groups, I think it's important to think about the application that we're trying to serve and not so much what the product can do. Because I think, especially a lot of times, very innovative teams and organizations like health tech or biotech get very focused about getting the product right, which is commendable. But I think the step after that, in order to be successful in partnering with health systems or any client, I would say, would be understanding what problem they're trying to solve and tailoring what your product and application is to solving that problem. Because generally, we're not interested in what a product is, we're interested in what it can do for us. And AI in healthcare is no different. We just really need to understand what problem are we trying to solve for that client, and how do we go about it in the most seamless way. And one last thing on that would be finding, again, good change management protocols to partner with these institutions or clients to be able to do. So a lot of times, decisions are made inside organizations without necessarily the depth of understanding or the knowledge of what that product or that company can do. So partnering very early on to set goals and to understand what the process of validation and implementation would really help set up that organization for success in the long term.
I love that answer, Mida. That's great. Ed, are you about to jump in?
Somebody's controlling my mute button. Sorry about that. I absolutely agree with Mida and Ohad. The hammer looking for a nail never works. And you come in selling me the whiz bang, and I'm first going to ask you, where are you live? Secondly, how are you integrated with the EMR? And thirdly, how secure are you? And, It's really amazing. I just actually went on a visit with a vendor yesterday, and it's a prime example of your question. It's a brand new product, first round seed money, and first coming to the U.S. It's up in 29 hospitals in Southeast Asia, but none in the U.S. The best thing we did was introed it to the CIO and let her bring it to the company. If we had come in the back door to the clinicians, the CIO would have been threatened because they own the EMR and all the risk, right? This way, it was a partnership coming in. That's number one. Number two, we didn't do the hammer looking for the nail. We said, what are your specific problems that you're struggling with in this clinical area that we have this tool? And we were all surprised because what we had in our mind were the problems unqualified. And for this specific healthcare organization, they had two hard and fast goals, and they blew me away because if we had not asked the day before we presented, we would have wasted the whole trip. So getting to know the client, what are their problems, how can you help? And then I think the other thing is the question of risks. And as a startup, you are a risk. Plain and simple. We have no idea how you're going to evolve, who's going to buy you, or are you going to go bankrupt? And who owns the code once you're not in business? The second question is, are you even scalable? So, entrepreneurs have thought about these problems, but healthcare problems, are broader. So the question is of scalability and can you adapt to the environment you're going into, I think are major barriers to coming into an organization. And again, who are the decision makers? And who has to sign off kind of thing, I know everything we brought into Stanford had to go through architecture review, technical architecture review, and the security team. And we had a hard and fast rule. If you don't pass go, you're not in. I don't care who supports you because we can't take that risk, right? So I think that's another thing. As a startup, you present a risk, and you got to figure out a way to mitigate those risks. Don't transfer them to the client.
This is the scary part of the webinar where it all seems lost, right? I mean, it is so many barriers to overcome. There's a great question from the audience, from Deanna. What are the top 3 objections you're seeing from practitioners and decision makers, and are they unique to healthcare? Ed, do you want to take that one?
I think I have actually seen a lot of receptivity. The fear is I'm guided wrong and I'm accountable. Mm-hmm. I think that's the real issue is how can you say the background formulas in these models are accurate and are they maturing with new data, right? I think that's a big deal for clinicians. But in the space of my own, I think it's startling. I mentioned the imaging thing. I could see a lot. I've seen advances in video integration now. Now you're talking the ability for things like dermatology, which takes 2 months to get a visit anywhere if you're lucky. Maybe you can do initial screening just by a photo, as an example. I think those are the opportunities. But I think on clinicians' part, they're worried about mistakes and they're worried about errors, and they are accountable. When the lawsuits come on negligence, they hit the organization and the clinicians, and that's why our costs in healthcare are so high. It's so I think that's probably the biggest issue. I think as more and more clinicians are exposed, they were very leery of EMRs, right? But then the government incented us all, and in 5 years we had 80% of hospitals automated. So you can get over it with the right leadership, but the key question is is it keeping up with valid data, and is it guiding me in the right directions, or am I potentially going to make a mistake?
Is that what you're hearing, Ohad, as well?
Yes, maybe I can elaborate more on that. So I think since automation of EMRs, the automation came with a lot of promises, right, for practitioners. Say you'll be able to do your job easier, you'll be able to get more accurate predictions, everything will be AI-based, stuff like that. Tell you the truth, none of that happened. And what did happen is that we basically tripled the time that a practitioner needs to be in front of a computer instead of a patient. So I think the major objections that I hear from doctors are you going to save me time, or are you going to give me more things that I need to do with the same result? So if we can save them time, or maybe highlight facts or important thing that they might miss, connecting to what Ed just mentioned about liability here, then I think the adoption will be easier.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I definitely agree with you, Ohad, and I've actually heard that first hand at a previous role that I held. And I think that one of the things we need to do moving forward is reimagining how we're designing AI to do certain things. Because to your point, Ohad, automating workflows perhaps has the promise to do a lot, but then you're adding another layer to what was before. But I think with AI, we need to reimagine what documentation means, what continuous monitoring means. I saw one of the questions from the audience thinking about, okay, wouldn't the providers or healthcare practitioners be, there would be more work added to them, to their plate if they now have to do continuous monitoring and look at that data. And I think if we reimagine how we're actually solving those problems, not just putting AI in the workflow, but actually reimagining the workflow, I think that's probably the challenge now. And with the way that we've been looking at things is just, replace one process with an automated process. But I think we need to rethink that entire design.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's, sorry. Ohad, go ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, but I do think that it's a trust game. Then we need to incorporate AI to flows that are basically are more trustworthy. And once we'll get that trust from the community, we can then take it to the next level. What you're talking about is obviously the holy grail of AI in medicine.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to do a speed round where we look towards the future. So the question is, what's one unexpected way generative AI will transform healthcare in the next 5 years? I'm going to start with you, Mida.
Sure. I think we've been talking about it a lot, actually, is the medical documentation. I would say that there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think there are some big players like Amazon announcing Health Scribe and, getting into that. And also Epic and Nuance, a company from, owned by Microsoft, are going into that space with ambient documentation. So I think that there's, big players getting in, which usually means that you can get into larger EMRs and hopefully get into more health systems. And there's a lot of alternatives for smaller, groups as well that they can pursue.
That's a great answer. Ohad, unexpected way generative AI will transform healthcare?
So I think maybe not just healthcare, but I think that practitioners will have an agent that are maybe an assistant AI that is working with them, transcribing, taking medical notes, checking past history, even try to maybe suggest a diagnosis the doctors might have missed. So it will be like an AI tool sitting on your desk, recording the visit, taking all the notes, and also giving you workflows or suggesting that you as a practitioner just need to approve or disapprove or maybe find your way in. So I think for the next 5 years, it is feasible.
Ed?
I never have one answer, sorry. But I think just to summarize some of what we've been saying here today, and maybe it's not under the unexpected thing, we're hoping that clinicians can see more patients and leverage their skill level, not waste it doing admin tasks. So if we can take burden off and reallocate the productivity to patients who really need it, I think is going to be a thing, and I do believe that's expected. I think the other one is personalized medicine and the advancement in genomic testing, along with integration of the whole history of the patient and family, and individual attributes like metabolism rates and other conditions. I think if we can advance personalized medicine and get away from, 40 milligrams for the population, that is not valid. And I think we're going to get to better outcomes for patients as well.
So we have a couple minutes, so I'm going to just take some of the top questions from the Q&A here. Matt Jensen, this is a great question for anyone building with AI. For healthcare professionals looking to refine their AI skills and expertise, what kind of certifications, training courses, books, organizations do you recommend? Ohad, do you have any off the top of your head?
So I don't have recommendations for courses, but I think that the rule of thumb, don't try to replace the engineers, but do try to understand what are the capabilities. So try to read about healthcare startups, healthcare solutions that are using AI that are already incorporated into the system. You can always take a basic programming and a basic machine learning course. Coursera is a great course for that, just to understand the very basic mathematics of things. But I think if you understand the capabilities, you'll know what to ask for, and you know what's making sense and what's not.
Mida, has there been anything that was useful to you on that question?
Yeah, I would say, there's a lot of open source and public information, but I think Ohad touched on a very important point that I think is important for any data scientist in any specialized space to understand is the use cases and what problem they're actually trying to solve. So I think you could certainly learn data science if your mind is leaning toward that area. Then you're already you're going to always pick up really good ways of creating new algorithms. But I think the challenge is understanding what problem are you trying to solve, and then how you could leverage your knowledge in data science and apply it to that space.
Great answer, guys. I think that brings us to the end here. We're at time, right on time. Yes. Thank you so much to the panelists for coming, and to all the attendees. We're going to follow up tomorrow with an email to everyone, so we'll have resources in that, as well as a recording of this panel, so that you can watch it again and share it with friends. And thanks so much for coming, everyone. It was a real pleasure to talk through these issues with you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.